In this lesson, we're answering the question, how are types of government different around the world? You have seen that countries around the world have different forms of government. To understand how those governments function, we'll start by looking at how government structures distribute power.
You already know that not every country has the same type of government. What are some of the differences? Well, one difference is how governments split up power. Governments tend to divide power using one of three basic structures, either the confederal system, the unitary system, or the federal system. Let's take a look at all three. In a confederal system, government power is split equally among different units, or independent states. The result is a confederation, where each unit functions independently. Think about a confederation as an alliance between equal partners. The units work together to meet mutual needs, and there's little or no central authority. Confederations sometimes form a weak central organization to serve specific needs. For example, the central organization might form an army, or they may set up a money system. But confederations aren't very common around the world. Now, a unitary system of government is like the opposite of a confederation. In a unitary system, a central authority holds all the power. Think about the word unitary. The root word unit means one, so in a unitary system, one unit holds all the power. Local offices must follow decisions made by the central government. Now, the federal system is one of the most common systems of government. In a federal system, government power is divided among different levels of government. Each state has some independence, but in a federal system, the central government and smaller units all influence each other. For instance, the United States uses the federal system. There is a central national government and 50 state governments, and the national government is referred to as the federal government because it heads the overarching government structure.
What's our lesson question? How are types of governments different around the world? Well, we've just looked at different ways power can be divided among state and national governments. Confederal, federal, and unitary systems distribute power to different degrees. Unitary systems give the most power to national governments. But who rules those national governments? In this segment, we're going to look at two systems of rule, autocracies and oligarchies, which are ruled by one or a few.
In an autocracy, one person holds all authority and makes all the decisions regarding how the country is run. There are two basic forms of autocracy, a dictatorship and an absolute monarchy, which are both forms of authoritarian rule. Each form is defined by how the person came to power. Authoritarian governments are characterized by a strong central power, all power resting with the government, and limited democratic freedoms or protections for the people. We're going to look now at the different forms of autocracy. One of the most basic forms of autocracy is a dictatorship. In a dictatorship, one leader holds absolute power. The leader often gains power through the use of force. Once in place, the dictatorship may be supported by military rule. Dictators often use propaganda to influence public opinion. In a dictatorship, propaganda is false or misleading information or ideas that are deliberately spread to the public. Propaganda is used to further the dictator's purposes. Dictatorships are one of the two most common forms of government in the world today. The other is constitutional democracy. Dictators do not call themselves dictators. The same is true for fascist leaders. An absolute monarchy is another type of autocracy. In an absolute monarchy, a king or queen leads the country. Also known as a monarch, that leader has total power, which means he or she makes all the country's decisions. In an absolute monarchy, leadership power is passed down through a royal family. Keep in mind that not every country with a king or queen is an absolute monarchy. Constitutional monarchies, which are democratic, also have a king or queen. For example, England has a king, but he is just a figurehead. The English government has a parliament with elected representatives who vote on and pass laws. Next, we're going to look at some governments that are not autocratic, but that don't share power with their citizens either. In addition to autocratic forms of government, there are other systems of government in the world. They are oligarchies, theocracies, and communist systems. Let's take a closer look at each of these systems of government. An oligarchy is a government system in which a small group of families or elite individuals rules the country. Oligarchy is a Greek word which means rule by a few. This type of government is run by a small group of families or elites. Like autocratic systems, oligarchies have a history of being oppressive and treating their citizens harshly. This system is also an example of authoritarian rule, which means there's a strong central power in government and people's democratic freedoms are limited. Oligarchic systems usually only benefit the group who is ruling the country. A theocracy is ruled by religious leaders who believe their right to rule comes from divine authority. Theo comes from the Greek word meaning God, and in a theocracy, rulers are thought to get their power from God or a divine source. They are thought to be divinely selected and to rule with divine guidance. Therefore, they use religious rules to govern. A theocracy can be a dictatorship, a democracy, or a monarchy. Communism is a government system based on an economic and social theory, so it incorporates economic ideas in governance. In a communist system, in theory, property and the means of production are owned and shared in common by the public. However, communism has not been practiced this way. In countries with communist rule, power is concentrated in a single political party that controls all aspects of society, especially the economy and the government. Communist governments claim authority to rule under an ideology that stresses a powerful government rather than private ownership of property. This often results in a small group of political party leaders controlling a nation's power and wealth. Because these governments aren't democratic, some communist governments are also dictatorships. Now, you will answer a question about what you've learned in this section. You've learned about governmental systems in which citizens have little power and few freedoms. Now, as we work to answer our lesson question, how are types of governments different around the world? Let's look at systems of government in which citizens do have power and freedoms. Democracies, which are ruled by many. In a democracy, the government gets its power from the will of the people. In a direct democracy, all people take part in government decisions directly. In a representative democracy, people choose leaders who make decisions. This picture shows people voting in Ghana. A direct democracy is also called pure democracy because it's the most direct way for citizens to exercise their power to shape the government they live under. Citizens vote to make governmental policy and decisions. Direct democracy is usually traced back to the city of Athens in ancient Greece, but this is misleading. Only some of Athens' citizens were given the right to vote. Only male citizens with military training were allowed to vote. They made up about 10 to 20% of the population. The other 80 to 90% of the population was excluded from voting. This group was composed of women, enslaved people, freed slaves, children, and foreign residents. Direct democracy has limited use in larger governments today, and it's not found very often. It isn't practical for the modern world or for large voting populations. Imagine if every citizen were involved in every governmental decision. In today's world, the complex responsibilities of government and the number of questions that must be decided make direct democracy impractical for much of the day-to-day work of government. Think about how hard it is to decide what to do or where to go when spending time with a large group of friends. What if you had to get thousands of people to agree, rather than just a handful? Let's look at the kind of democratic government that is most widely practiced around the world today. The major democratic nations of the world practice representative democracy. Representative democracy gets its name because citizens vote for leaders who will represent them. In a representative democracy, citizens elect leaders to serve in a legislature. A legislature makes laws. This image shows a meeting of the members of the U.S. Congress. The rights of the people, such as freedom of speech, are protected by a constitution. Now let's look at two major types of representative democracies. There are two major types of representative democracies. In a parliamentary system, the parliament is the lawmaking body. It consists of members elected by the public to serve as representatives. An example of this is in England, where the parliament consists of two houses, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. In a presidential system, the legislature is the lawmaking body. It, too, consists of members elected by the public to serve as representatives, the U.S. Congress. Both the House of Representatives and the Senate make up our legislature. In the parliamentary system, the Prime Minister is the head of the government. The political party with the most seats in Parliament selects the Prime Minister. Because there is no real separation of powers between the executive and legislative branches, the Prime Minister can exert great influence over lawmaking under this system. In the presidential system, the President is the chief executive and head of the government. The President is elected by the public. What's important here is that there is a separation of power between the legislative and the executive branches.
The terms democracy and republic have different meanings to different people throughout history, but it's important to know some of the key differences between these ideas. The word democracy comes from the Greek words demos, meaning people, and kretos, meaning power. In this type of government, power is given to citizens of a state. Citizens in a democracy meet regularly to vote on leaders, laws, and how to run the government. The government of ancient Athens is credited as the birthplace of democracy. This government in Greece is known as a direct democracy. Republicanism is similar to democracy, and in fact throughout history, many people have used the term interchangeably, but there are some key differences. In a republic, people are still involved in the government, but instead of making decisions themselves, they elect or vote for representatives to make important decisions for them. This helps solve one of the biggest issues with democracy: growing populations and voters who are not experts in political matters. The representatives meet and vote on laws or how to run the government. A great example of this would be the United States. Citizens in the U.S. vote for members of Congress and the President, who then make decisions on laws and the government. Today, many governments have merged these two important ideas into their own governments. There are times when people are directly involved in decisions, and times when they let elected representatives make important decisions.